Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. It's not the evening. It is around 4:15 Mountain Time, Monday, the 22nd of May. We're here at a different time. It's not 7:30. I know that many of you watched at 7:30, but if this doesn't work for your schedule, that's okay. You can still watch at 7:30. But I wanted to come on before I went home tonight and talk about what happened today. Big day in the court system in the Bryan Kohberger case. He was in court. A trial date has been set. We heard him speak, a little bit at least. And we're going to tell you everything that happened today at the hearing up in Latah County. A lot of people there. In fact, there were folks lining up at 3 a.m. just to be inside of that courthouse. We're going to talk with Chanley Painter from Court TV. She's been following this case from the beginning. She was out there in the snow in November when this case broke, before they had a suspect, back when we knew just that there were 4 college students who were dead. And she's going to kind of give us a feel about what's happening up in Moscow. Now, I want to admit right up front, I was not in the courtroom. I'm in Idaho Falls today. If you're not from the area, the courthouse is about 8 hours away, 8 to 9 hours from where I'm at. And it was a court hearing about 10 minutes long, maybe about 20 minutes long. And then there was a second hearing today. I'm going to explain everything that happened at both, but I am going based on what I saw because we were able to see the video and based on what other reporters have told me. So I want to be transparent and upfront that I was not in the courthouse, but I still wanted to give you the information if you're interested in it and possibly do future episodes about this case. I don't know this case as well as the Daybell case. So a lot of the questions you have, I probably can't answer. And there is far more media. There was a lot of media attention on the Daybell case, but there is far more media focused on this case. And I kind of like the cases that not a lot of people are talking about, if that makes sense. And there's one coming up that is exactly that. And I don't want to say what it is because then you'll know, and then people will start to look it up. But there is a case coming up here in Idaho that has gotten very little attention. It's a murder case. It's set to go to trial this summer. And one of the victims called me last Friday. There was more than one victim. One person died. The other victim called me and said, I want to talk. I'm ready to share my story. So I'm going to have that coming up. So in the next few weeks, Courtroom Insider is going to kind of, we're going to talk about Daybell, of course. We're going to talk about Kohberger, of course. I'm going to introduce some different cases. And we're going to talk about Dylan Rounds. I don't know if you're familiar with that case. If you're just new to me, to East Idaho News, Dylan Rounds is a farmer, a young man who vanished a year ago this weekend, Memorial Day weekend. I've been talking with his mom. Somebody was just charged with his murder a few weeks ago. Actually, it seems like a few weeks ago. It's actually been a couple months now. We're going to talk about that case. We've got other cases coming up. So there is a lot to talk about in Courtroom Insider, and I'm going to try to figure out a time that works best for my family and works best for you all to watch. So I hope you'll bear with me. The great thing is we don't delete these. So if you can't watch live, then you can go back and watch them later. I do want to know where you're watching from, though. That's always fun to go back and watch. So please, in the comments below, even if you're someone that never comments, if you just write your city, I'll know where you're from. These are the people, though, today that we need to remember. Kayla Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. 4 University of Idaho students who were stabbed to death on November 13th of 2022 by, allegedly, a man named Bryan Kohberger. These are the 4 people. There has been a lot said about them, a lot written about them. I mean, they were enjoying their life in college. It was right before the Thanksgiving break. I remember when we got word at East Idaho News that this happened, I believe it was an early Monday morning. I thought, this is odd. And sometimes as reporters, we get word of these things and you immediately think, oh, maybe it's a murder-suicide, or maybe it was a domestic issue, something like that. And when the police said, no, it wasn't, it just was weird. And then Thanksgiving break came and so many students were nervous to go back to campus. And then December came and Christmas break came, and still There were nerves. I remember talking with a source who knew the investigation very well. I think it was Christmas Eve, and they said, we think something's coming, that there's going to be an arrest. And then the 30th of December, right before New Year's, boom, they arrest Bryan Kohberger in Pennsylvania, of all places. What's interesting is that, my wife was in Pennsylvania. She has family in Pennsylvania, so it was odd that, she was there when he was getting arrested and taken into custody. But what a story this has become. For those of you that don't know, I'm going to recap it briefly. Then I'm going to play you a little bit of what happened in the courtroom today. And then we'll talk about what's next, and we'll talk with Chanley Painter too. So again, the 4 students here were found dead in their house right near the campus. Moscow's a small town. I kind of compare it to Rexburg. If you've been to Rexburg, I think it's a little bit bigger than Rexburg. Maybe it's a little bit smaller. I shouldn't speak about the particulars, but it's a small town. I don't think they'd had a murder since 2005, several years. So the police are called to the house. They find 4 people who are dead. A search, an investigation begins for whoever could have done this to these 4 people. A knife sheath is found inside one of the homes that eventually leads police to Bryan Kohberger, a young man who was not studying there at the U of I, but was studying in Washington, a PhD student, criminology. That's what he was studying. He was arrested. He was charged with 4 counts of murder, and a preliminary hearing was set to happen in June. Now, we hear a lot of court terminology, and if you're not working in it every day, it can be confusing. There's 2 options when someone is arrested on a felony for a prosecutor. You can charge someone and then set out a preliminary hearing. So when you're charged, you start off at the magistrate level. I'm going to compare this to the Daybell case because I know it well, and I think most of you know it. Lori Vallow Daybell was flown back from Hawaii. She had her first court appearance, very first time. Remember the pink lipstick? She walked in, it was packed. That was at the magistrate level, the lower level. Bond was set, and a preliminary hearing was scheduled. Now, a lot of defendants waive their right to that hearing, meaning if they do that, the case automatically advances to the district level. In Idaho, at the district level, this is where felonies are heard. At the magistrate level, this is misdemeanors, things like that. So if you're charged with a felony, eventually you'll end up in district court unless there's a plea agreement and you go down to the magistrate level. So Chad Daybell had a preliminary hearing back in August of 2020. You might remember that. It was during the midst of COVID. Nobody was allowed in the courtroom, but it was live streamed, so we were able to watch it, and it took place over 2.5 days, maybe 3 days. So they call witness after witness, and the prosecutor puts on like a mini trial. And at the end of this mini trial, at the end of witnesses and evidence, the judge decides if there's enough evidence to have the case bound over to district court. That's what happened with Chad Daybell. Lori waived her right to that trial, to the preliminary hearing in the beginning. This was before they were indicted. So this was the original charges. So Bryan Kohberger was set to have a preliminary hearing, one of these mini trials, in June. It was supposed to last several days. Well, the prosecutors put together a grand jury, which is a secret, very secretive. They did the same with Chad and Lori. You can't talk about it. The jurors can't speak about it. You're summoned to the courthouse. You're picked for a grand jury. This is done in private. This is, again, where the prosecutor presents all of the evidence they have on the suspect, which happened with Kohberger. And then at the end, the grand jury decides if there's enough to indict. And if there is, they can come out and say the person has been indicted. That's what happened with Chad and Lori. Once that indictment happens, you are arraigned, where you plead guilty or not guilty, and then a trial is set. And that's what happened today with Bryan Kohberger. There was an arraignment. You'll see in a minute, stood up but didn't plea. The judge entered a plea on his behalf, which is not that uncommon. Lori Vallow did not plea. She did not say guilty or not guilty. The court entered one on her behalf, not guilty. So that's what happened. And then from that moment of arraignment, you have 6 months to have the trial by Idaho law. And in Kohberger's case, the judge asked his attorney, when do you want to have the trial? And it ultimately settled on October. And the prosecution can weigh in, of course, on things like that. Now, a defendant can waive their right to a speedy trial, which is what Chad Daybell has done, but Lori Daybell did not. That's why we had her trial. It actually was longer than 6 months because of the delays with evidence and stuff, but it was still under a year since she was. So if Bryan Kohberger does not waive his right to a speedy trial, it actually could happen in the fall. A lot of people think it won't because this is such a massive case with lots of DNA evidence that they're going to need to test and whatnot, that it really could be held next year. But for now, that's when it's set. The prosecutor has 60 days from today to declare if they are going to seek the death penalty on Bryan Kohberger. Most prosecutors will say that because after 60 days, you can't add it to the table. You can take it off later, or you can use it as a negotiation for a plea agreement. But if it's not there, you can't work with it. So I would assume that in the next 60 days, we will have something filed by the district attorney or by the prosecuting attorney up there, Bill Thompson. He will file a notice to seek the death penalty on Bryan Kohberger. His attorney is well qualified. Her name is Ann Taylor. She's done a lot of death penalty cases. She is death penalty certified. She is a public defender. She was appointed to him. It was fascinating to watch him today look at her as she spoke. He didn't look around much during the first hearing, but according to Chanley Painter at Court TV, he did look at the gallery in the second hearing. She was right behind him. She looked at him. He looked at her. And she's going to describe that encounter for us in just a minute. But I want to play you part of the hearing from this morning. Again, there were 2 hearings. This is from hearing 1. After this one, we'll talk about what happened at hearing 2. This is Kohberger's first court appearance since, I believe, January or February, right after he was arrested. And if you remember that when he had scratches on his face, it was a little odd. But I'm going to play a little bit of this in case you missed it. The judge reads off his charges. They talk about when his attorney wants the trial to be held, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So here you go.
I'm going to start with the rights. You have a constitutional right to have an attorney represent you throughout these proceedings. If you cannot afford to hire a lawyer, then one is appointed at public expense. Ms. Taylor and her team have already been appointed, so that's taken care of. You have a right to a speedy and public jury trial where the state would be required to prove every element of each charge against you beyond a reasonable doubt. At that trial, you would have the right to cross-examine the witnesses called against you. That means to see, hear, and question them, to call witnesses to testify for you, and if you choose to testify in your own defense. But you're not required to testify because you also have the right of silence. That right is protected under the Idaho and federal constitutions, so you can remain silent throughout these court proceedings, and that can't be held against you in any way. What you do need to remember, though, is that anything you do say, other than to your lawyers, could be used against you in a later court proceeding. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. You also have a right to appeal any final decision of the court. In order to exercise that right, you need to file a notice of appeal within 42 days of that final decision, or that right is waived. Also, if you are not a United States citizen, any finding of guilt in this state could have adverse consequences to your legal status. Do you understand these rights?
Yes.
Any questions about the rights?
No.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kohberger. So, let's go to the indictment. Do you have a copy of the indictment in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And you see in the heading your name there. Is that your correctly spelled complete name?
Yes, it is.
Is that the correct birth date underneath your name?
Yes.
Are those the correct last 4 digits of your social security number?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to read you the charges on the indictment, starting with count 1, burglary. That is a felony under Idaho Code Section 18-1401 and 1403. This alleges that you, on or about November 13, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did unlawfully enter a residence located at 1122 King Road, Moscow, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder. Count 2, murder in the first degree. That was a felony under Idaho Code Section 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. This alleges that you, on or about November 13, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogan, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogan, from which she died. Count 3, murder in the first degree, a felony under Idaho Code Section 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. This alleges that you, on or about November 13, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Kayla Gonsalves, a human being, by stabbing Kayla Gonsalves, from which she died. Count 4, murder in the first degree. That's a felony under Idaho Code Section 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. Alleging that you, on or about November 13, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Zana Kernodle. Excuse me. This is hard. I'm sorry. Zana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing Zana Kernodle, from which she died. Count 5, murder in the first degree. This is a felony under Idaho Code Section 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. This alleges that you, on or about November 13, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing Ethan Chapin, from which he died. This is signed on May 16, 2023, by the presiding grand juror. So now I'm going to go to the maximum penalties of each charge, starting with count 1, burglary, minimum 1 year, up to 10 years in imprisonment, fine of up to $50,000 for both fine and imprisonment, restitution for the victim's economic losses resulting from the crime. For counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, murder in the first degree, maximum penalties, life in prison or the death penalty. Fine of up to $50,000 for both fine and life in prison or the death penalty. Restitution for the victim's economic losses resulting from the crime. Also, additional fine of up to $5,000 to be paid directly to the victim's families. If you are found guilty or plead guilty on each charge, and the maximum sentences are imposed consecutively, that means one right after the other, you could be facing 10 years in prison, followed by 4 consecutive life sentences or death penalty, fines of up to $200,000 and $20,000 to be paid directly to the families, with any restitution resulting from the crimes. Okay. Mr. Kohberger, do you understand the charge in count one, burglary?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count two, murder in the first degree?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count three, murder in the first degree?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count four, murder in the first degree?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count five, murder in the
Yes.
first degree? Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Taylor, is Mr. Kohberger prepared to plead to these charges?
Your Honor, we will be standing silent.
Okay, because Mr. Kohberger is standing silent, I'm going to enter not guilty pleas on each charge, counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, at this juncture, the state has 60 days to give notice of intention to seek.
Okay, so he stood silent. And a lot of you are wondering, what exactly does that mean? Well, it's not that uncommon. I pulled some research that says the refusal to enter a plea at this point is unlikely to have a significant impact on the case, Eve Brzezinski-Primus, a law professor at the University of Michigan and an expert, said. Lawyers may recommend that course when they expect to argue that their client is not competent to stand trial or not guilty by reason of insanity. Well, in Idaho, there's no insanity defense, but her attorney might be laying out a situation where Kohberger is not competent due to mental issues. Idaho is one of 4 states that does not provide explicitly for insanity pleas. This is from the New York Times. But defendants in the state can introduce testimony at trial to show that as a result of mental illness, they are not guilty of certain elements of a crime, like the malice aforethought that must be proved in order for a jury to convict a defendant of murder. Another possible explanation is that Mr. Kohberger did not want to tell the court he was not guilty. In that situation, the lawyer might decide on standing silent, allowing Mr. Kohberger to avoid pleading out loud while still moving the case forward as if he had pleaded not guilty. Practically, there is no difference in effect, Ms. Primus said, but if there are mental health issues, there might be reasons why you might not want to hear your client, why you might not want your client to speak in court. So a lot of people have been making a big deal that he's decided to stand silent and the court ordered a not guilty plea on his behalf. Ultimately, I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's on a not guilty, on the record, and that's what it is. Now, it would have been a huge deal if he had said guilty, obviously, because that takes everything out of the equation and he's saying he's guilty. So that was the first hearing. There was a second hearing right after that dealt with the gag order that's in effect and media cameras. And basically, the magistrate judge, remember I was talking about the lower court and the higher court? The magistrate judge earlier on in this case, earlier this year, put a sweeping gag order on anyone associated with the case, including the families, which is kind of unusual to tell the families that they cannot speak publicly or with the media about it. I don't know if I have seen that before, a public gag order. And so there was a coalition of media that got together, led by the Associated Press, to fight this gag order. And it made its way to the Idaho Supreme Court. The Idaho Supreme Court kicked it back to the local court. So that's where it stands now. So the media and at least one family, Casey Gonzalez's family, is asking the judge to rule on this gag order. And I want to read to you a statement that her family, Casey's family, put out today to all of the media. It says, by the way, the name of this judge is John Judge. Judge. The family would like to thank everyone for continuing to follow this case and keep the memories of Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan alive. They are what is important, not the defendant. We are thankful that the Latah County District Attorney's Office finally took the case to a grand jury and came back with an indictment. At the same time, we are disappointed that the judicial process has not been more efficient in addressing the gag order. This is just the beginning of a long journey for all the families, and we are thankful for your continued support and coverage. That is from the Gonzalez's family attorney, who sent it out on behalf of the family. So that is what they had to say today. After the conference, this is a brief synopsis about the gag order. Kaylee's family and several media organizations are separately fighting against the gag order, which prohibits attorneys, prosecutors, law enforcement agencies, and others involved in the case from talking to the news media. During Monday's hearing, Kaylee's family attorney asked the judge to make a quick decision on the order. The judge said that the media coalition's legal fight was delaying a quick ruling in the matter and said the media needs to tone down its challenge. Judge set a date of June 9th for hearings to be held to address the gag order and whether or not cameras will be allowed in court. So we'll know more on June 9th about the gag order and the cameras in the court for the trial. He did allow cameras in today, which was nice. If you want to watch it, it wasn't live, but what happened is the video was shot and then it was fed to the news. We were able to get it and then share it with you all. So we've posted both hearings on our YouTube channel if you want to go watch it. Now, again, I was not in the courtroom today, but Chanley Painter, who you all might know from Court TV, was there, and I had a chance to speak with her. I want you to hear from her, and she has her first-hand account about what happened in the courtroom. So let's welcome in Miss Chanley. Joining me now, Chanley Painter. You probably recognize her if you've been watching the Daybell trial, and of course now the Bryan Kohberger hearing. She's been on this since it broke. She is at the courthouse. Just telling me that you were up very early this morning, Chanley, to be sure that you got in the room.
Yeah, that's right, Nate. So actually there was a line that formed outside this Latah County Courthouse in Moscow, Idaho, around 3 a.m. is when people started to show up to garner one of those seats inside the courtroom, which were first come, first serve. And of course, the line was probably 60 or so people by the time they actually let the crowd into the courtroom, and it up really quickly. And there were some even in the overflow room as well to watch this all unfold and see Bryan Kohberger in person. Not only just media, Nate, but also members of this community that drove in or came just to be a part of this. These murders shook this community, less than a year ago, 6 months ago, I believe it was. They're still in shock here, and they're just wanting to see this process unfold. So
Chanley, talk us through, once you got in the courtroom, we heard Mr. Kohberger say a few things, very short, but he didn't enter a plea. What was that like, hearing the judge read the charges and hearing him respond?
Yeah. Right. So, of course, we're sitting in the courtroom. I know you've been in lots of courtrooms too, Nate, where it's kind of this grim silence as we wait for the defendant to walk in. All eyes are on that door. We know he's going to enter, and then we hear it open. Everyone goes, it's like this collective gasp almost in the gallery as this alleged mass murderer enters wearing his orange jail-issued garb and walks robotically in his ankle shackles to the counsel table, stoic and emotional. And then as the judge reads the rights, reads the indictment of charges against him, he answers, yes. He does it very directly and sharply, like he wants to come across confident in the courtroom. And then, of course, the family members of the victims are sitting there just glaring, Nate, at him the whole time that he's in there.
And then there was a second hearing today, Chanley. What was that about?
There was a second hearing for scheduling outstanding matters in this case. Motions back and forth regarding this extensive gag order that the magistrate judge put on the case early on that prevents the parties and likely the victims' families' representatives from speaking about this case. So there's a motion to clarify that or vacate that by a media coalition that was scheduled out for June 9th to actually hear those arguments. And then also there's outstanding motions, as with any litigation or trial, about discovery, motion to compel discovery from the defense. That's going to be heard June 27th from the defense. So that was taken care of in that second hearing. And Kohberger, again, he was in there. He walked in a second time into the courtroom. And this time, Nate, I'm sitting on the front row right behind defense counsel table. And he glances towards the gallery. And I made eye contact with Bryan Kohberger for a split second. And it was like my stomach dropped. I froze. his eyes were piercing and dark, and it felt like an eternity to me, but of course it probably only lasted a split second. It was just a wild moment to sit there and to see someone who's accused of such horrific things.
Yeah, I can imagine that was a little surreal. And now everybody says, why don't they have the trial next week? Let's get this thing on the road. But we're not going to be seeing an actual trial, assuming there aren't any delays or plea agreements or anything, at least until the fall.
That's right. So interesting that the defense asked the judge to set his trial date right outside the speedy trial time limit, which the judge set it for October 2nd of this year. So a few months from now. A lot of times they set an initial trial date, right? And it's continued somehow. There's a motion to change venue, or the defense decides to hold off on things. But as of right now, it's going to happen pretty quickly within a year.
Yeah, that is quickly. I mean, of course, you and I have both been following the Daybell trial, which took 3.5 years to actually get to a trial. So I would be somewhat surprised if it does happen. But Lori Vallow did not waive her right to a speedy trial, and maybe Kohberger is insistent that they go forward with it. And then the prosecution, I believe, is at 60 days they have to file if they want the death penalty.
That's right, Nate. So 60 days from today, the prosecution must file that notice of whether or not they will seek the death penalty. They have to, of course, allege the certain aggravating factors they would pursue, much like, again, we saw for Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell in that case. So we shall see. This is something that is expected, given that there were 4 victims and the brutal nature of their murders and the evidence that we do know from the affidavit. The prosecution is expected to do that. But again, we'll have to wait and see. And that could, of course, also delay the trial, right, if that's filed and they need some more time to prepare for the case.
Stanley, what's the mood like around the town? I think that the university let out a week or two ago. So I know that there was some pushback, or at least people not wanting media earlier this year. And I can only imagine, I mean, they want to live their life. Is that still the mood? What are people, are they able to talk to you, or do they just kind of want their privacy?
Yeah, this is a very different Moscow than I experienced last November. I was here in this small town within days of this quadruple murder, and this town was on edge. Community members were scared for 7 weeks. There was a mass murderer on the loose. They had no idea who it was. And even, after the arrest and after his first appearances in court, you can still tell that this has left such a scar and a stain on the community. But these are vigilant people. These are people who want justice, and they want to see it unfold, and they come together. Every time I'm here, I meet new people. I love being in Moscow. It's a fun, small town. And I spoke to several people who showed up today to just watch this court process unfold. A couple of mothers who dropped their kids off at daycare and then came over to the courthouse to watch it unfold. We see a lot of court watchers that will come, a father and daughter duo who traveled in to be here today, and they just they feel personally affected, of course, by what happened. And they say that nothing like this ever happened here. They're completely shocked still, and they want to make sure justice is served, and their hearts go out to the families. And Moscow is a strong community. I've seen that. There's still signs across town about supporting the police and in this process of justice.
You and I joked a few weeks ago at the Daybell trial that you should open an office in Idaho. You're going to know every small town from all corners of the state. I haven't had a chance to ask you officially, what was your reaction to Lori Vallow Daybell being found guilty all counts?
That was to be expected. I think, you and I both sat in the courtroom every day. We watched the evidence unfold in front of us. We had our eyes on the jury, noting their reaction to the evidence. So it was not surprising at all to me, the outcome, the verdict in that case. It was just a little disappointing me that I couldn't be there on verdict day. As I told you, in advance, that I had a long planned time off or a day off, and that I had to go do something else. But my Sport TV team, of course, had it covered, and I was watching from afar. But I definitely believe that justice was served there.
Yeah, Chanley was there for 6 weeks, and on the very last day, on verdict day, she put family above job, which is to be admired to do that. And then she took a week off from Idaho, and now she's back. So Chanley, thank you very much. Is there anything you want to add? Anything you think our viewers should know about this case or the Daybell case? Anything else you want to touch on?
No, I love being in Idaho. I hate that the reason why I'm here, of course, is not a positive reason, but the people of Idaho remind me of where I'm from. I'm from Arkansas. I am that rural state in the South. And so it kind of feels like being home here, except for the snow. So I'm glad there's no snow currently where I am in Moscow. It's warmed up a bit. But we're going to continue to follow those cases. This Kohberger will be here for every hearing. Nate, and of course, as Vallow, the sentencing coming up and Chad's trial. So more to come there for that.
Yeah. All right. You can catch Chanley on Court TV following all of the developments on all of these cases and more. And thank you so much, Chanley. Nice chatting with you. Thank you, Chanley, again. And my apologies. The internet connection up there was so bad. There were so many media people in outside the courthouse that were on the internet. And so, yeah, it's gained a lot of attention, these Idaho cases. And there's more, if you can believe it or not. There's more that just keep happening. So I want to keep you informed without getting into the crazy speculation of everything. If you want to really get caught up on the case of Bryan Kohberger, Dateline did a phenomenal 2 hours on Friday night with some really deep sources. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a contributor with them, but I watched it and I learned a lot. And I don't know if it's online yet, but it will be. And if you're watching from other places, sometimes you can't get the video, but you can go on podcasts and listen to them. So they take the shows and they put them on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and whatnot. And you might not be able to watch it, but you can at least listen to them. So I would imagine in the next day or so, they will have those out there so you can watch. And if you missed the Daybell one on the verdict, on the trial from 2 weeks ago, that's on the podcast list. I think it hit #1. So thank you. Right when it came out, that's out there as well. So that is what we have here. I did want to update you on the Daybell case. Lori is back in the Madison County Jail. We talked about that. Right now, they're in the process of compiling the pre-sentence investigation report. That can involve several people interviewing her, interviewing others, because normally those take 60 days. But because this is a very serious case, high profile, a lot of serious charges, a lot of convictions, 6 counts, it can take longer. If she cooperates with them, it might even take a bit longer. So realistically, I'm thinking that she will be sentenced in August. Once that happens, Arizona says they want to extradite her down to Maricopa County, where she faces the counts for Brandon's attempted murder and Charles's attempted murder. Now, some of you have asked, will she get death penalty on those? I'm sorry, not attempted. Well, it was attempted. Charles died. She's not charged with attempted murder. She's charged with conspiracy to commit murder for Brandon and Charles. Brandon did not die, so it wasn't attempted murder. I just want to be sure I'm clear on the charges. It's the conspiracy on both of those cases. And from what I understand, she cannot face the death penalty on those because it wasn't actual first degree with aggravating factors. But she can get life in prison on those. And you saw how long it took her to get to trial here. I would suggest, should everything go as planned in Arizona, let's say Lori gets sentenced in August, Arizona extradites her and she doesn't fight extradition. She fought extradition in Hawaii, and finally they just extradited her because she gave up the fight. But should she go with it, maybe they get her to Arizona, I don't know, end of August, September. She's got to get an attorney. She's got to go through the whole legal process. Maybe there's a trial in Arizona, although if she doesn't waive her right to a speedy trial there again, next spring, maybe at the earliest. She could also say, I'm just going to plead guilty, or they do some sort of plea. She, I don't know what it would be. And she gets life there and life here, and I don't know where she'd serve it, there or here. So that'll be interesting to see it all unfold. I don't know if anyone at this point is 100% sure what's going to happen. Exactly. Then we've got Chad's hearing or trial, which was, we still don't have a date yet, but of course his attorney suggested next June. The state did not oppose that. That would probably be at the earliest because they had the 60 witnesses at Lori's trial. And I'm told there is still additional evidence on Chad that did not come into Lori's trial. There's still more. And that'll be fascinating. And his will be much longer. John Pryor said 12 weeks. And his is a death penalty case. So there'll be a penalty phase if he's found guilty. So we could be prepping for that a year from now. We could be getting ready to go to Ada County again. That's another wrinkle too in this, that there was so much, the reason that it was moved to Ada County is because of saturation of media coverage on this side of the state. That was the argument. But I don't know. Now Boise really covered it. Everybody covered it. I mean, it's a big story, but could you find the jurors? I don't know. I have not visited with you again live since I interviewed the juror, Saul. If you want to go back and watch that interview, he was juror number 8. Great guy from my interactions with him. Saul and I ate dinner together with his wife and son on Tuesday night at a restaurant in Boise. I think we were there 2-3 hours. We got out late. It was fascinating to talk with him and hear about how he respects the legal system. He grew up in Mexico where things are obviously different, and how he sees serving on a jury is a duty, as a not an obligation, but something he respects in America. And we talked about that. We talked about some other stuff, just kind of off the record, about what he witnessed and things like that. He wanted to be very respectful of all of the other jurors and not share, their thoughts, very respectful. And then we went over to his house the next day and did the interview in his backyard. And we put up the entire interview. There may have been, I don't know, a minute or so that we didn't, just because it maybe there were some stumbles on my behalf or whatever, but we just wanted to share the whole thing with you. I have spoken with another juror who does not want to be involved in the media. He just had a couple of questions for me. We spoke off the record, and I hope that one day this juror will talk. I won't go into further detail because it was off the record, but this juror had an interesting perspective as well, sitting in there. And then there is the alternate juror, who I'm sure you've seen interviews with. I have not spoken with her. She's done interviews with several news organizations, and she has a different perspective too. How these interviews came about is a very wise person who's covered a lot of court trials told me, write a letter to the jurors, to each of them, and give them to the judge and say, when this case is over, when there's a verdict, will you pass these letters out or put them back in the room? Well, I didn't do that because I don't ever want to be accused of, affecting a juror or anything, or having communication I'm not supposed to. But I did send an email to the trial court administrator, who's kind of over the judge's schedules and all that. I said, I'm interested in interviewing any of the jurors who will talk. Other reporters did the same thing too. And then once the verdict was reached, the court told the jurors, here is a list of media people who want to talk to you. It's up to you to contact them. I'm told that out of the 18, the 12 jurors and the 6 alternates, 3 expressed interest in possibly doing media. One was the alternate, who you've seen, Tiffany. One was Saul. And then I don't know who the third one was. It was not the person who called me. So if you're watching, I'd still love to talk to you, or any of the other jurors who didn't express media interest. And then the verdict was reached Friday. Saul reached out to me on Sunday and said, I was a juror. I'd love to talk to you. And you should have seen my reaction. I was like, Erica, my wife, was outside pulling weeds. I went running out. How do you look at this? So I wrote him back and I said, hey, we can talk on the phone tonight. He said, no, let's talk tomorrow. And I'm like, no, let's talk tonight. There's a whole backstory as far as Good Morning America also interviewed him. And anyway, I'll tell you another day what happened there. But there were other news agencies that do hire private investigators or bookers to go after the jurors to try to get them on the air immediately. And we don't do that. And you're not supposed to follow jurors, and there are ways that you can find out who they are. I believe I've said this. My worry was I'd run into a juror in Boise one night at the grocery store, and I like to say hi to people, and I might say hi to them, and then, oh no, and the next day in court, the juror's like, I spoke with a reporter, and then they get dismissed. That'd be horrible. I didn't want that. That didn't happen. So anyway, that's how that interview came about, and I'm always honored when people decide to share their stories with me and for me to tell them. And Several of you have emailed me over the course of the past few weeks with fascinating stories about you. I really am in Idaho, so I'm focusing on Idaho cases. To those of you out of state, I appreciate your concern. I mean, one of you sent an email that's crazy that I want to look into about body snatching, and that's all I'll say here. So there's a lot of programming ahead that I want to share with you, a lot of reporting, again, on this case, some other murder cases over the summer. I'm not going to have like a set schedule. Perhaps I will when things get a little closer or underway, so I can tell you when to tune in, but I will do my best to keep you posted on important days when things are happening in court. So that's what I have for you. But again, before we go, these are the people we need to remember today. 21-year-old Kaylee Gonzalez, 21-year-old Madison Mogan, 20-year-old Zaina Kernodle, and 20-year-old Ethan Chapin. 20 and 21, just in the prime of their lives, enjoying things. They should be getting ready for the summer. The U of I students went home last week. They should have gone home and planning boating trips and vacations and summer jobs, and instead we're talking about them and just how sad it is. They're just so sad. But hopefully justice can be served, as it has been in so many others. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good night. I'll be back again another day. I don't know when, but I'll keep you posted. And have a great Memorial Day weekend if I don't talk to you before then. We'll have some interesting stories coming up. So I appreciate your support. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great night.